Manuscript Found in a Bottle by Edgar Allan Poe. Complete audiobook. An ancient bottle floats in the sea with a sealed manuscript inside. The author of the message claims to have boarded a ship that does not belong to this world. An immense, black, and ghostly vessel dragged him into an eternal storm. Inside, he found spectral sailors who completely ignored him. Before disappearing into the abyss, he threw this warning into the sea. I have little to say about my country and my family. Unfair treatment and the passage of years have alienated me from one and alienated me from the other. My heritage allowed me to receive an unusual education, and a contemplative bent enabled me to methodically transform the knowledge diligently acquired in early studies. But above all, I took great pleasure in the study of the German moralists, not from any misguided admiration for their eloquent folly, but from the ease with which my rigid mental habits enabled me to detect their falsehoods. I have often been reproached for the dryness of my talents. A lack of imagination has been imputed to me as a crime, and the skepticism of my opinions has made me notorious at all times. In truth, I fear that a strong inclination toward physical philosophy has tainted my mind with a very common error in this age. I speak of the habit of referring events, even those least susceptible to such reference, to the principles of that discipline. In short, I do not believe that anyone is less prone than I to stray from the severe limits of truth, allowing themselves to be carried away by the eins fatui of superstition. It has seemed appropriate to establish this premise, so that the incredible story I must narrate will not be considered the ravings of a runaway imagination, but the authentic experience of a mind for whom the reveries of fantasy have been a dead letter and a nullity. After many years of traveling abroad, in the year 18, I embarked from the port of Batavia, on the prosperous and populous island of Java, on a cruise through the Sunda Islands archipelago. I was a passenger, induced only by a kind of nervous restlessness that haunted me like a malevolent spirit. Our beautiful vessel, weighing about 400 tons, had been built in Bombay from Malabar teak with copper rivets. She was carrying a cargo of raw cotton and oil from the Laccadive Islands. We also had on board coconut husk fiber, brown sugar from the Eastern Islands, clarified butter made from buffalo milk, cocoa beans, and some crates of opium. The cargo had been badly stowed, and the ship was listing. We set sail, driven only by a light breeze, and for many days remained near the eastern coast of Java, without any other incident to break the monotony of our course than the occasional encounter with the small two-masted boats of the archipelago to which we were bound. One afternoon, while leaning over the railing of the stern rail, I saw a very singular and isolated cloud to the northwest. It was remarkable not only for its color, but also because it was the first we had seen since leaving Batavia. I watched it attentively until sunset, when it suddenly extended eastward and westward, surrounding the horizon with a narrow band of vapor and forming the shape of a long shoreline. My attention was soon attracted by the deep red coloration of the moon and the strange appearance of the sea. It was undergoing a rapid transformation, and the water seemed more transparent than usual. Although I could clearly see the bottom, upon taking the sounding sound, I found the ship was proceeding in 15 fathoms of water. Then the air became intolerably hot and charged with spiral exhalations, similar to those arising from red-hot iron. As night fell, all traces of a breeze disappeared, and a calmer state was impossible to imagine. A candle flame burned on the quarterdeck, motionless, and a long hair, held between two fingers, hung without the slightest vibration. The captain, however, said he perceived no indication of danger, but as we were drifting in the direction of the coast, he ordered the sails to be struck and the anchor to be dropped. He posted no lookouts, and the crew, mostly Malays, deliberately lay down on deck. I went below, overcome by a bad feeling. Indeed, all appearances warned me of the imminence of a simoom. I expressed my fears to the captain, but he paid no attention to my words and departed without deigning to reply. My anxiety, however, prevented me from sleeping, and around midnight I went on deck. As I placed my foot on the bottom step of the companionway, I was startled by a loud, intense noise, similar to the rapidly turning of a mill wheel. Before I could ascertain its meaning, I perceived a vibration in the center of the ship. A few moments later, a furious sea of foam crashed down upon us, passing over the bridge and sweeping the deck from stem to stern. The extreme violence of the gust was, in large measure, the ship's salvation. Although completely covered by water, her masts having been blown overboard, after a minute she righted herself heavily, surfaced, and after wavering for some moments under the pressure of the storm, finally righted herself. It would be impossible for me to explain what miracle saved me from destruction. Stunned by the shock of the water, I regained consciousness and found myself squeezed between the aftermast and the wheel. I struggled to my feet, and as I looked around, dizzy, my first impression was that we were among reefs. So tremendous and unimaginable was the whirl of huge, foaming waves in which we were engulfed. A few moments later, I heard the voice of an old Swede who had embarked shortly before the ship sailed. I called to him with all my might, and presently he staggered up to me. We soon discovered that we were the only survivors. With the exception of ourselves, the waves had just swept away everything on deck. The captain and officers must have died in their sleep, for the cabins were completely flooded. Without help, there was little we could do to keep the ship safe, and we were paralyzed by the conviction that we would soon capsize. Indeed, the first blast of the hurricane tore the anchor cable to pieces, otherwise we would have sunk instantly. We were proceeding at a tremendous speed, and the waves were breaking over us. The stern timbers were shattered, and the whole ship had suffered severe damage. But we found with joy that the pumps were not jammed, and that the ballast did not appear to have shifted. The first gust had subsided, and the violence of the wind no longer posed much danger. But the possibility of its complete cessation terrified us, convinced that in the midst of the next swell, we would undoubtedly die. But it did not seem likely that this justifiable fear would soon become a reality. For 5 full days and nights, during which our only sustenance consisted of a small amount of molasses, we laboriously managed to procure on the forecastle. The hull of the ship advanced at a speed impossible to calculate, driven by successive gusts that, without equaling the violence of the original simoom, were more terrifying than any other storm I had experienced in the past. With minor variations, for the first 4 days our course was southeast, and we must have skirted New Holland. On the 5th day, the cold was intense, despite the wind having shifted slightly to the north. The sun rose with a sickly yellowish hue and climbed only a few degrees above the horizon, without radiating any decisive luminosity. There were no clouds in sight, yet the wind increased and blew with uneven and irregular fury. Around noon, approximately, for we could only guess at the time, our attention was again drawn to the appearance of the sun. It did not radiate what we might properly call light, but a dull, gloomy glow, without reflections, as if all its rays were polarized. Just before sinking into the turgid sea, its central fire abruptly went out, as if by some inexplicable power. It was reduced only to a pale, silvery ring that was rapidly sinking into the unfathomable sea. We waited in vain for the arrival of the 6th day, that day which for me has never come, and which for the Swede never came. From that moment on, we were plunged into profound darkness, so much so that we could not have seen an object 20 paces from the ship. The eternal night continued to envelop us, undimmed even by the brilliant phosphorescence of the sea to which we had grown accustomed in the tropics. We also observed that, although the storm continued to rage with endless violence, it no longer retained its usual appearance of waves and foam with which it had formerly enveloped us. All around us was horror, profound darkness, and a black, suffocating ebony desert. A superstitious terror grew in the mind of the old Swede, and my own soul was wrapped in silent wonder. We secured ourselves as best we could to the base of the mizzenmast, staring bitterly at the vast ocean. There would be no way to calculate the time or predict our position. However, we were fully aware of having traveled further south than any previous navigator, and we were astonished not to encounter the usual ice impediments. Meanwhile, every moment threatened to be the last of our lives. Enormous waves, like mountains, rushed forward to crush us. The swell was beyond my imagination, and it was a miracle we didn't capsize instantly. My companion spoke of the lightness of our cargo and reminded me of the excellent qualities of our ship. but I could not help feeling the utter futility of even such hope, and I melancholically prepared myself for a death, which, in my opinion, could not be delayed for more than an hour, for with every knot the ship traveled through the black and gloomy sea, it grew more violent. At times we gasped for breath, lifted to a height greater than that of the albatross, and at other times we were dizzy with the speed of our descent into a watery hell where the air stagnated, and no sound disturbed the kraken's slumber. We were at the bottom of one of these chasms when a sudden cry from my companion resounded horribly through the night. "Look, look," he exclaimed, shrieking in my ear, "Almighty God! Look, look!" As he spoke, I perceived a faint, reddish light gleaming along the sides of the immense gulf in which we found ourselves, casting a certain brilliance upon our deck. Raising my gaze, I beheld a sight that chilled my very soul. At a tremendous height, directly above us, and on the very brink of the liquid precipice, floated a gigantic vessel, perhaps 4,000 tons, although she was riding on the crest of a wave more than 100 times higher than any ship of the line or of the Eastern Island Company. Her enormous hull was of a deep, dirty black, and unadorned by the usual figureheads of ships. A single row of bronze cannons peered from the open gunports, their gleaming surfaces reflecting the lights of countless battle lanterns swung to and fro in the rigging. But what excited us most of all astonishment and stupefaction was that, in the midst of this supernatural sea and this ungovernable hurricane, she should sail with all sails set. When we first saw her, we only discerned her prow, and little by little she rose above the somber and horrible whirlwind. For a moment of intense terror, she paused on the dizzy pinnacle, as if gazing upon her own sublimity. Then she shuddered, wavered, and rushed upon us. At that instant, I don't know what sudden self-control sprang from my spirit. Stumbling, I retreated as far as I could aft, and there fearlessly awaited the catastrophe. Our own ship had finally given up the struggle, and was sinking bow first into the sea. Consequently, she received the impact of the descending mass on the already submerged part of her structure, and the inevitable result was that I was thrown with irresistible violence against the shrouds of the unknown vessel. At the moment I fell, the ship veered and listed, and I supposed that the resulting confusion had prevented the crew from noticing my presence. I made my way without difficulty and unseen to the main hatch, which was partially open, and soon found an opportunity to conceal myself in the hold. I cannot explain why I did so. Perhaps the principal reason was the indefinable feeling of dread which, from the first instant, the crew of that vessel aroused in me. I was not disposed to confide myself to persons who, at first sight, inspired in me a vague strangeness, doubt, and apprehension. I therefore deemed it advisable to find a hiding place in the hold. I accomplished this by moving a small portion of the frame, and thus secured a convenient refuge among the enormous frames of the vessel. I had scarcely completed my work when the sound of footsteps in the hold compelled me to make use of it. A man passed by my hiding place, advancing with feeble steps and an unsteady gait. I did not catch a glimpse of his face, but I had an opportunity of observing his general appearance. Everything about him spoke of weakness and advanced age. His knees trembled under the weight of his years, and his body seemed burdened by a great load. He muttered under his breath, as if talking to himself, uttered broken words in a language I did not understand, and began to feel his way around a pile of peculiar-looking instruments and old charts that lay in a corner. His attitude was a strange mixture of the stubbornness of second childhood and the solemn dignity of a god. At last he came back on deck, and I saw him no more. A feeling I cannot define has taken possession of my soul. It is a sensation that admits of no analysis, against which the experiences of past ages are inadequate, and to which the key, I fear, will not be offered me by the future. For a mind like mine, this last consideration is a torture. I know that I shall never, never be satisfied with the nature of my concepts, and yet it should not surprise me that these concepts are indefinite, since they have their origin in entirely new sources. A new sense, a new entity is incorporated into my soul. It has been a long time since I walked the deck of this terrible ship, and I believe the rays of my destiny are concentrating into a focus. What incomprehensible men! Wrapped in meditations whose nature I cannot guess, they pass by me without perceiving my presence. To hide myself would be madness, for these people do not want to see. A few minutes ago, I passed directly before the eyes of the second officer. It was not long since I ventured into the captain's private cabin, where I took the materials with which I now write and have written the above. From time to time, I will continue to write this journal. It is possible that I may not be able to find the opportunity to make it known to the world, but I will try to achieve it. At the last moment, I will put the message in a bottle and throw it into the sea. An incident has occurred which gives me fresh cause for reflection. Do these things happen by force of ungoverned chance? I had ventured on deck where I was lying, unobtrusively, among a pile of slashes and old sails, in the bottom of a sloop. While meditating on the singularity of my fate, I inadvertently took a brush dipped in pitch and painted the edges of a trailing sail carefully folded over a barrel at my side. The sail has been hoisted, and the thoughtless marks I made with the brush unfold themselves into the word discovery. I have lately made many observations upon the vessel's structure. Though well armed, I do not believe her to be a warship. Her rigging, construction, and general equipment contradict such a supposition. I can easily perceive what the vessel is not, but I fear I cannot affirm what she is. I know not why, but as I observe her strange model, and the singular form of her masts, her enormous size and excessive sails, her severely plain prow and antiquated stern, a sensation of familiar things suddenly crosses my mind, and with these vague shadows of memory is always mingled the memory of old foreign chronicles and remote ages. I have been studying the ship's timbers. They were built of a material unfamiliar to me. The peculiar characteristics of the wood give me the impression that they are unsuitable for the purpose to which they were intended. I refer to its extreme porosity, apart from the worm damage caused by sailing in these seas and the rot caused by age. Perhaps my observation seems excessively unusual, but this wood possesses all the characteristics of Spanish oak, if Spanish oak were expanded by artificial means. Reading the previous sentence, I'm reminded of the adage an old Dutch sea wolf always used to repeat when someone questioned its veracity. It's as certain as there is a sea where the ship itself grows in size, like the living body of the sailor. An hour ago, I had the audacity to merge with a group of crew members. They paid me not the slightest attention, and although I was standing in their midst, they seemed absolutely unaware of my presence. Like the first one I saw in the hold, they all showed signs of advanced age. Their weak knees trembled. Their shoulders drooped with decrepitude. The wind shook their wrinkled skin. Their voices were low, tremulous, and broken. Their eyes shone with the tears of old age, and the storm horribly stirred their gray hair. Around them, all over the deck, lay scattered mathematical instruments of the most picturesque and antiquated construction. Some time ago, I mentioned that a foremast wing had been hoisted. Since then, driven wild by the wind, the ship has continued its terrifying southward course, with all sails set from the tops of the masts to the lower bowsprits, plunging her yardarms every moment into the most frightful watery hell a human mind can conceive. I have just left the deck, where I find it impossible to stand, although the crew seems to experience little inconvenience. It seems to me a miracle of miracles that our enormous mass is not finally devoured by the sea. We are undoubtedly condemned to float indefinitely on the brink of eternity without finally plummeting into the abyss. We ride waves 1,000 times more gigantic than any I have ever seen, over which we glide with the ease of a seagull, and the colossal waters raise their heads above us like demons of the deep, but like demons limited to mere threat and forbidden to destroy. Everything leads me to attribute this continual flight from disaster to the only natural cause that can produce such an effect. I must assume that the ship is sailing within the influence of a powerful current or a rushing swell. I have seen the captain face to face in his own cabin, but as I expected, he paid me not the slightest attention. Although to a casual observer, there is nothing in his appearance that could distinguish him, more or less, from an ordinary man, the awe with which I contemplated him was mingled with a feeling of irrepressible reverence and respect. He is about my height, that is, 5 feet 8 inches. His body is solid and well-proportioned, neither robust nor particularly remarkable in any respect. But it is the singularity of the expression that reigns on his face. It is the intense, the marvelous, the excited evidence of such absolute, such extreme old age that excites in my spirit a sensation, an ineffable feeling. His brow, though little wrinkled, seems to bear the stamp of a myriad of years. His gray hair is a story of the past, and his eyes, even grayer, are sibyls of the future. The cabin floor was covered with strange sheets of paper held together by iron clasps, ruined scientific instruments, and obsolete navigational charts. With his head in his hands, the captain gazed anxiously at a paper which I took to be a concession, and which, in any case, bore the signature of a monarch. He muttered to himself, like the first crew member I saw in the hold, stubborn syllables of a foreign language, and although he stood very close to me, his voice seemed to reach my ears from a mile away. The ship and all its contents are permeated by the spirit of old age. The crew glide back and forth like ghosts of long-buried centuries. Their gazes reflect restlessness and anxiety, and when the strange glow of the battle lanterns illuminates their fingers, I feel what I have never felt before, despite having traded in antiquities all my life, and absorbed the shadows of fallen columns at Baalbek, Tadmor, and Persepolis, until my own soul became a ruin. Looking around, I am ashamed of my former apprehensions. If I trembled at the gust that has pursued us until now, how could I not be horrified by an assault of wind and sea, the definition of which the words tornado and simoom are trivial and ineffective? In the immediate vicinity of the ship, the blackness of eternal night and a chaos of foamless water rain. But about a league on either side of us, one can dimly and at intervals see imposing walls of ice rising toward the desolate sky, resembling the walls of the universe. As I imagined, the ship is undoubtedly in a current, if that's what you can properly call a tide that, howling and shrieking between the white walls of ice, rushes southward with the speed of a tumbling waterfall. I presume it is absolutely impossible to conceive the horror of my sensations. Nevertheless, curiosity to penetrate the mysteries of these horrible regions prevails over my despair and will reconcile me to the most odious appearance of death. It is evident that we are rushing towards some fascinating knowledge, a secret impossible to share, the discovery of which entails destruction. Perhaps this current will carry us toward the South Pole itself. I must confess that a supposition apparently so extravagant has every probability in its favor. The crew walks the deck with restless, trembling steps, but on their faces the anxiety of hope overcomes the apathy of despair. Meanwhile, we continue sailing with the wind astern, and since all sail is set, the ship rises at times above the sea. Oh, horror of horrors! Suddenly, the ice opens to the right and left, and we spin vertiginously in immense concentric circles, surrounding again and again the edges of a gigantic amphitheater, the apex of whose walls is lost in darkness and distance. But I have little time left to meditate on my destiny. The circles are rapidly narrowing. We are rushing furiously into the maelstrom, and amid the roaring, the howling, and the thundering of the ocean and the storm, the ship shudders, oh God, and sinks. End of manuscript found in a bottle.